Hi friends from all parts of the world. This is one of the series of videos we will be sharing that covers the various safe travel lanes for incoming travelers to Singapore. Currently, there are up to 10 different travel lanes that are available for various purposes. However, these lanes and its corresponding conditions may change swiftly according to the latest COVID-19 situation at home and abroad. Before we go on, if you'd like to receive the latest news on the gradual opening of Singapore borders, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell to be notified when we post new videos. In this video, we will share what the Vaccinated Travel Lane or VTL is about. The VTL is formed for fully vaccinated travelers from Brunei Darussalam and Germany with effect from 8 September 2021, 0001 hours Singapore time. We will only touch on returning Singapore citizens and permanent residents for now. SCs and PRs are still able to return to Singapore from other countries and regions, but we will cover that in a separate video. SCs and PRs do not need to apply for a Vaccinated Travel Pass or VTP to travel to Singapore under the VTL, as they can return to Singapore without the need for entry approval provided they adhere to the VTL requirements. For non-SCs and non-PRs travelers from Brunei Darussalam and Germany, they must apply for a VTP with effect from 1 September 2021, 0001 hours Singapore time for entry into Singapore from 8 September 2021, 0001 hours Singapore time. We will share the application requirements in another video. Please look out for the link pasted below. So let us quickly share an overview of the VTL requirements for SCs and PRs. There are 5 requirements to fulfill. Number 1. Vaccination status. Travelers must be fully vaccinated, meaning they must have received and completed the full regimen of Pfizer, BioNTech, Comirnaty, Moderna or WHO EUL vaccines at least 14 days before their intended date of entry into Singapore. Number 2. Travel history. Travelers must be in Brunei Darussalam or Germany for the last 21 days before departing for Singapore. Number 3. Designated flight. Travelers must travel on non-stop designated VTL flights. Number 4. COVID-19 testing. Travelers must undertake the polymerase chain reaction or PCR test at least 48 hours prior to departure. On-arrival PCR test at Changi Airport and post-arrival PCR test on day 3 and day 7 of arrival in Singapore taken at one of the designated clinics. Number 5. Self-isolation till confirmation of PCR result. Travelers are required to be isolated in a pre-declared residential or non-residential accommodation until they receive a negative on-arrival COVID-19 PCR test result. Now we will discuss the general itinerary of SCs and PRs travelers using the Vaccinated Travel Lanes into 3 stages. During pre-departure, travelers must undergo a COVID-19 polymerase chain reaction or PCR test within 48 hours before the scheduled departure time of the designated VTL flight to Singapore at an internationally accredited or recognized laboratory, clinic, or medical facility. A test result certificate must be obtained in English, stating the following: the traveler's name and at least one other personal identifier, such as the date of birth or passport number, a negative COVID-19 PCR test result, the date and time when the COVID-19 PCR test was taken, and the name of the testing institution conducting the COVID-19 PCR test. Book a ticket on a designated VTL flight. The respective airlines are Royal Brunei Airlines and Singapore Airlines for Brunei Darussalam, Lufthansa and Singapore Airlines for Germany. Travelers to Singapore must remain in their country and region of departure in the last 21 consecutive days before departing for Singapore. Monitor their health status before departure. This may seem obvious, but it's necessary to remind all potential travelers that they should not travel to Singapore if they have symptoms of COVID-19, are diagnosed or suspected to have COVID-19 infection in the last 21 days before departing for Singapore, or had close contact with any person with COVID-19 in the last 14 days before departing for Singapore. To define, close contact refers to providing care for a COVID-19 patient, including in healthcare or social settings, staying in the same place as a person with COVID-19 such as household members, or are aware that they had close proximity of less than 2 meters apart and prolonged contact of 15 minutes or more with a person with COVID-19. Submit their health, travel history and accommodation declarations electronically via the SG Arrival Card e-service, no earlier than 3 days prior to their date of arrival in Singapore. I've pasted the link to this e-service below. In addition, travelers should register and make payment at this link for their on-arrival COVID-19 PCR test prior to their departure for Singapore. I have also pasted the link below. When checking in at the departure airport, travelers must present to the airline staff a valid proof of vaccination status, which can be in the form of a vaccination status on the Trace Together app, a vaccination status on the Health Hub app, or an electronic or physical copy of the vaccination certificate stating the traveler's name and at least one other personal identifier, such as the date of birth or passport number, corresponding exactly with the information in the traveler's passport used for entry into Singapore, the country of vaccination, the name of vaccine used or vaccines if more than one type of vaccine is received over more than one dose, the date of vaccination or dates of vaccination if more than one dose was administered. The next item the travelers must present to the airline staff is a valid pre-departure COVID-19 PCR test result certificate, electronic or physical copy in English, stating the traveler's name and at least one other personal identifier, such as the date of birth or passport number, corresponding exactly with the information in the traveler's passport used for entry into Singapore. A negative COVID-19 PCR test result, the date and time when the COVID-19 PCR test was taken, which must be within 48 hours before the scheduled departure time of the designated VTL flight from the declared country and region of departure to Singapore, and the name of the testing institution conducting the COVID-19 PCR test, which must be from the list of internationally accredited or recognized laboratories, clinics, or medical facilities. The link to this list can be found in the description below. Upon arrival in Changi Airport, travelers who need to purchase Singapore dollars or SIM cards or rent mobile phones must do so in the airport transit area prior to clearing arrival immigration. This is because travelers are required to leave the airport immediately after their on-arrival COVID-19 PCR test to isolate in their declared accommodation until the test result is confirmed to be negative. At arrival immigration in Singapore, all travelers must present to the ICA officer the same documentation that was presented to the airline staff at the departing airport. After undergoing the on-arrival COVID-19 PCR test at the airport, travelers must immediately take private transportation, taxi or private hire car to travel to their declared accommodation and remain in isolation at their accommodation until they are notified that their test result is negative. Travelers shall also bear any transportation and accommodation costs incurred. Travelers are not permitted to enter any retail or food and beverage establishments or procure any goods and services at the airport, including especially Jewel Changi Airport. The only exception is for the purchase of Singapore dollars or SIM cards or mobile phone rental, which should be done either at the airport transit area before arrival immigration, in the baggage claim hall, or within the designated arrival passenger zone in the airport landside area. Travelers are required to be isolated until they receive a negative on-arrival COVID-19 PCR test result. The types of accommodation for self-isolation are residential accommodation or non-residential accommodation such as hotel or service apartment. Travelers must isolate alone or with household members who are vaccinated and have the same travel history, arrival date, and self-isolation requirement. If there are other occupants in the self-isolation accommodation without the same travel history, arrival date, and self-isolation requirement, the travelers must isolate in an enclosed room with an ensuite toilet. The travelers and the other occupants must wear their masks, observe hand hygiene, and minimize interactions solely to the purpose of facilitating the entry of the travelers into the enclosed self-isolation room with an ensuite toilet. Travelers are required to bear the cost of the accommodation in Singapore if applicable. If need to, travelers may refer to the Singapore Hotel Association website for a list of hotels. The list is non-exhaustive, and travelers may book other available accommodations as long as they offer individual rooms with an ensuite toilet. The results of the on-arrival COVID-19 PCR test will likely be available within 24 hours. Once travelers have been notified that they have tested negative for COVID-19, they can leave their declared accommodation and go about their activities in Singapore. Travelers are responsible for their medical expenses should they require medical treatment for COVID-19 while in Singapore. While in Singapore, travelers must adhere to the prevailing public health measures, which include requirements on wearing of masks and safe distancing, and any other safe management measures relevant to the activities that they participate in or settings that they visit. Travelers are required to undergo post-arrival COVID-19 PCR tests at a designated clinic by 1500 hours Singapore time on day 3 and day 7 of their arrival in Singapore. Instructions for the dates of tests and the designated chain of clinics will be emailed to the travelers upon their arrival in Singapore. They can make payment for their post-arrival COVID-19 PCR test in person at the clinic when they show up for their test. If travelers are leaving Singapore and their time of departure from Singapore is before 1500 hours on the day of test, they will be exempted from taking their scheduled PCR test. Any unutilized charge, excluding administration fees, will be refunded by the designated chain of clinics to the credit card used to pay for the test. If their time of departure is on or after 1500 hours on the day of test, they are still required to take their scheduled PCR test. They do not need to wait for the test result to be released before departing Singapore. The traveler's time of departure from Singapore is defined as the scheduled time of departure of their flight or ferry, or the time they clear departure immigration if they depart by land. Failure to undergo the required COVID-19 PCR test may constitute an offence under the Infectious Diseases Act and may render the traveller liable upon conviction. In the case of a first offence, to a fine not exceeding 10,000 Sing dollars or imprisonment for a term not exceeding 6 months, or to both. For subsequent offences, the traveller may be liable on conviction to a fine not exceeding 20,000 Sing dollars or imprisonment for a term not exceeding 12 months, or to both. A traveller who fails to undergo the required COVID-19 PCR test may also be required for public health reasons to serve a stay-home notice or stay order at an SHN dedicated facility pursuant to the Infectious Disease Regulations 2020, and to pay for all charges related to his or her stay, as well as any additional COVID-19 tests required as part of the SHN regime. With that, we come to the end of the video. Keep a lookout for our upcoming videos that will touch on the other safe travel lanes. Thank you for watching, and I wish you a safe flight back home.